Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carter.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Garner. Today is February 10th, 2026, and tonight's episode is all about Part 23, Examination of Lamentations, between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon and the King James Bible. Yes, it's another bland episode. I know a lot of you guys were hoping I would continue the conspiracy theory stuff, but to be honest, God really wants me to finish this. I know it. This is so important, not just for this show, but for me personally. And I'm really tired. It's been 2 days of no sleep. My poor son has been keeping himself up. It's been just a long journey, but everything's going to be all right. So bear with me as I continue to yawn during a nightly show. I can't. So tonight we're talking about Lamentations. Now, Lamentations speaks in the aftermath of Jerusalem's destruction. The warnings of Jeremiah have become lived reality. The city lies desolate. The temple has burned. The people are scattered, and yet the book does not present chaotic despair. Its poetry is structured, acrostic, and pretty much deliberate. As grief is disciplined, sorrow is given form. And the opening chapter personifies Jerusalem as a widow, once full and now abandoned. And the language is intimate and exposed, yet it does not accuse God unjustly. Now, the city confesses sin even while describing suffering. Translation must preserve both accountability and anguish. If sorrow is exaggerated, the book may sound hopeless. If responsibility is softened, then covenant seriousness weakens. So at the center of this book stands a declaration that reframes the lament. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed. Great is your faithfulness. So hope appears not as denial of devastation, but as confession within it. Oh, God, forgive me, guys. Confession within it. So the tone here must be balanced very carefully. Oh, and by the way, yes, I've had 3 cups of coffee. I'm tired. So this is not sudden triumph. It is steady endurance grounded in covenant mercy. So the final chapters return to petition, and the people plead for restoration while acknowledging divine righteousness. So the book then closes unresolved, ending with appeal rather than resolution. Translation must preserve this tension, as Lamentations does not rush toward closure. It remains within prayer. The Ethiopian Tewahedo witness preserves Lamentations within the covenant continuity of exile and future restoration. And the King James has shaped centuries of English-speaking understanding of biblical lament. So structurally, though, both traditions maintain the arc of grief, confession, hope, and appeal. Differences will emerge primarily in cadence and emotional shading rather than theology. This examination will follow the established anchor. Scripture first, commentary second. The guiding questions remain consistent, however. Does translation alter theology, or does it shape cadence? Well, in a book where every chapter is a cry, tone becomes inseparable from truth. So it's going to be an interesting show. Hopefully I can get through it. I'm really, really exhausted. Oh, man. 2 nights of no sleep. That's insane. I don't know how my wife does it. She basically is the one who sleeps with my son. She's been gone for 4 days. She just came home tonight. So, poor gal. But we are in transition with my son into a group home. And we're hopefully going to have it done Thursday. Due to paperwork, it keeps getting pushed back day after day since Monday. That was the day we were supposed to try. Supposed to be on the 9th, but these things are normal. It happens. I just have to be patient. All right. So forgive me again. I need to blow my stinking nose. Phlegmy. That's me, man. And I used to not be until they started spraying us. Let's get a shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number 1 warrior is Scorpion saying, clock it in for church. I hope everyone is well glad to be back. I hope everyone is well glad. Oh, he's glad to be back. All right, well, glad to have you back, Scorpion. Number 2 warrior is Boots Hafner saying, seated class is about to start. Hello, Pastor James Carner, voice of the Rumble airwaves and creator of ElitePotion.com. Hello, warrior family. Hoping everyone is all right. All right. Let's all hit that thumbs up button. Yes, please do. Follow me if you would. Take your finger on your phone and hit the X button. Then hit the thumbs up and then hit live chat. It actually helps my show, believe it or not. And this is a way of spreading the gospel. That's how I feel anyway. Oh my God, I can't do this. You know, I didn't want to skip out on you guys, so I'm really just banging through it. No, I'm not sick, not at all. I'm just tired. Ugh. Sick and tired. All right, so thank you, Boots. Thank you, Scorpion. Guys, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
Yes. Investigators are wrangling the video from Nancy Guthrie's Google Nest camera. And out in the background, you can see a dude who's obviously dressed as a Hollywood-style burglar with a bulletproof vest. What is going on, man? I'm telling you, just as the dude would say, man, this is amateur hour. Or that would be Walter. Amateurs. I can get you a tow, dude. I can get you a tow by 4 p.m. Oh, my God. Oh, yeah, I love The Big Lebowski, by the way. I can't help it. It's a funny show. Another Caucasian Gary. Grand jury declines criminal charges against 6 Democrats who urged the military to reject Trump's orders. Well, how much money did it cost to go through all that bullshit? Scorpion says, Charlie Sheen might have something to wake you up. Oh, I'm sure he would. What was that? What was that stuff he was selling? Something like dragon's blood. I do remember a long time ago buying one of his shirts. I don't think it was him, but it was his face, meaning I don't think he was one that was selling the shirts. Someone was just copying his face, but it said winning. Well, is he winning now? Well, I don't think so. ICE chief refuses to apologize for Minneapolis shooting victims being labeled as, what is it being labeled as? Terrorists. Well, the ICE chief, hasn't he been around since Obama? You know, Obama, Trump, then Biden. Same ICE chief, same problems. This isn't the first ICE shooting of a civilian, by the way. It happens every other year because they get in the way of protest. Well, that's not smart. Ex-police chief said Trump told him in 2006 everyone knew of Epstein's behavior. Yeah. Well, Trump, you're hanging out with him. You are not a Christian. You publicly switched from Christianity to Judaism. So whatever this national prayer you're going to be doing in May of 2026, I believe they're going to be praying to Baal and Moloch. So, and also if you read the Epstein files, I haven't, I'm not spending any time on it. I'm done with that. Because I know that they're satanic, bunch of baby eaters, and Trump's in on it. But regardless, there's a lot of damning evidence against Trump in those Epstein files. It's just not going away, folks. And I think China is just, the Democrat Party. Oh, they're going after it, man. Yeah. FBI cited debunked claims to obtain a warrant for Fulton County vote records. Apparently, according to a document that shows, guys, every county, every city, every state cheats. Sorry. They all do. They have always done it. It's not just one person or group of people or organization. It's history. History. They were, during the beginning days, years of America, talking 250 years ago, in the newspapers, they were saying that presidents cheated to get their way in. This isn't anything new. Whoever controls a city, like a mayor, whoever controls a county, there is no real mayor of a county, is there? And whoever they would be that's the representative. The person that controls that county is either, there's two of them. There's a congressman and a senator. And then whoever controls the state, the governor, they cheat, steal, kill, lie, and destroy to get into power. This is reality. And I'm not talking about for the left or the right. I'm talking about for all of them. Because there's money to be made. I have yet seen a real candidate come in and slash budgets and say, we're not going to be giving money to these useless organizations anymore for useless things. I haven't seen any of that. Not in any state. It's all ran by criminals. Now, you can choose to believe it and actually be set free from the worry of, hopefully maybe one day we'll get a good king. Or just not believe it and still be angry. Well, the Bible says the world is fallen. And this is what a fallen world does. And it's not just in America, it's global. When you get older and you have wisdom, you start to see through the bullshit. Trump touts a bill that could make voting harder for married women. What? What is this? This is according to, I think, USA Today. I got to read this. I don't like reading the whole thing, but President Trump is urging lawmakers to pass a voter ID bill that has caught heat in the past for provisions that several voting rights groups warn could lead to voter disenfranchisement, including among married women. The Save America Act. Yeah, it's never what it really says, which passed in the GOP-led House of Representatives last year, but has since stalled in the Senate, is again at the center of discussions on Capitol Hill after it returned to the House floor. Lawmakers are expected to vote February 11th, tomorrow, on the legislation which would require people to provide proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. Federal, not state. And demand voters show a government-issued photo ID that proves their citizenship to cast their ballots. This means when you vote for president. I don't see how this has to do with women. Supporters call the efforts a security measure and say that they're trying to reinforce laws that will bar non-citizens from voting. However, voting rights advocates say it's exceedingly rare for non-citizens to vote, and such anomalies are pervasive enough to influence election outcomes. They put right there, there's a error. USA Today, you guys, you put 2 twos there, T-O and T-O. If I read it like you wanted me to read it, it would say, aren't pervasive enough to influence election outcomes. So get professional, folks. These groups include the Brennan Center for Justice, say the laws could make it more difficult for millions of Americans, haven't heard anything about women yet, to cast a ballot. Cast it. Especially younger voters and voters of color. Millions of women whose married names aren't on their birth certificates or passports would also face extra hurdles to register to vote and cast their ballots. What? Let me read that again. How? Millions of women whose married names aren't on their birth certificates or passports would also face extra hurdles to register to vote and to cast their ballots. Nearly 80% of women in opposite-sex marriages take their spouse's surname, according to a 2023 support study by the Pew Research. Most married men, 92% of them, keep their last names. Republican lawmakers in more than 24 states introduced measures requiring people to prove their citizenship over the past year, which would require people to provide documents such as birth certificates or passports when they register to vote, according to the Nonpartisan Voting Rights Lab. We're nonpartisan. Okay, so this bill would force people to get a voter ID if it passes. This is to save America. That's not going to save America. If you just loved your neighbor, you would save America because it would catch on. But regardless, I don't even know I read all that crap. You know, none of that is going to pass. So don't worry about it. All right, when we come back from a quick commercial, we're going to be talking about part 23 of our examination of Lamentations between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox and the King James Version.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
I'll give you $10,000 if you can find just one person who's never filed a tax return.
Have you ever filed a tax return? Yes.
Nobody. Not one. It starts at 16. That first job, that first form. The moment they became a taxpayer. Every April 15th, millions keep signing the same contract, thinking it's the law. But it isn't the law that binds them. It's the signature. 98% of Americans never owed it. Learn more at unincorporatedassociations.com.
All right, we're back and we're talking about Lamentations tonight, part 23 of our examination of the Ethiopian canon and the King James Version. And here we find that the city sits in silence. Well, the temple's gone. Once filled with pilgrims and song, Jerusalem now sits alone, as the streets that carried festivals carry ashes now, and the gates that welcome tribes now hang broken. Lamentations does not begin with argument. It begins with emptiness. It says, and I quote, "She weeps bitterly in the night, while the city is given voice as a widow abandoned. Her lovers have turned away, her children are gone, and the language is intimate and exposed. Yet it is restrained by poetic structure here. Grief moves alphabet by alphabet, as if sorrow itself must be disciplined. There is no denial of guilt, as Jerusalem has sinned grievously. The destruction is not framed as injustice from heaven, its consequence acknowledged. The book does not protest judgment as unfair, it mourns in itself in weight. Then in the center of ruin, a confession actually rises. Through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed. Well, faithfulness is declared while the smoke still lingers, and hope does not wait for rebuilding. It emerges as within devastation. So mercy is recognized even when walls remain fallen. The tension is profound here, as the same God who allowed the temple to burn is called faithful. The same Lord who disciplined is appealed to for restoration. So lament becomes prayer. Sorrow becomes petition. The Ethiopian Tewahedo witness in the King James rendering will stand together in this examination. In poetry, cadence, which carries emotion. A single word can deepen anguish or soften despair. So the question tonight is not whether theology changes, but how grief is heard. Now, Lamentations does not close with resolution. It closes with plea. Restore us to yourself. The book ends without visible answer, yet not without hope. The covenant is not denied, it is sought. This is disciplined sorrow. This is faith that refuses to speak lightly in suffering. And the tears of exile are real, but they are spoken with covenant frame. And judgment has fallen, mercy is remembered, and the final word is still awaited. This is the city as widow and the discipline of grief. Lamentations opens not with analysis, but with an image. Jerusalem is personified as a widow, once full, now alone. And the tone must be heard carefully. The sorrow is intense, yet it is not chaotic. The poetry is structured, restrained, pretty much deliberate. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox witness, and I quote, "How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She who has great among the nations, or who was great among the nations, she who was a princess among the provinces has become a slave. She weeps bitterly in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her." Now, by this time, the Persians kicked their ass, stole their gold, and stole their freaking religion. They did, because the Persians took Judaism, created the Kabbalah, created the Jewish Bible, the Talmud, and completely corrupted it and said that, hey, pedophilia is great. In fact, in the Talmud, they argued at how much money it would cost to marry and buy a 6-year-old virgin. That's how disgusting the Persian Judaism, wicked Talmud, which ended up in Europe, and that ended up under the hands of, families like the Rothschilds, who used it and believed in it. Now, here's that same verse in the King James. "How doth The city sits solitary. That was full of people. How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she hath none to comfort her. The structural alignment here is close. The Ethiopian rendering reads with contemporary clarity, how lonely sits the city. Now, the King James phrase, how doth the city sit solitary, it carries archaic cadence that intensifies solemnity. Both preserve the image of isolation, however. And the description of becoming a slave versus tributary, well, that reflects tonal nuance. Slave emphasizes humiliation directly. Tributary suggests subjugation through imposed tribute. Both convey loss of sovereignty, yet the emotional shading differs slightly. The repeated refrain, none to comfort her, establishes a central theme of abandonment. Comfort will later reappear as petition. So the tone here must not be exaggerated into theatrical despair. It is dignified sorrow. The acrostic measure of the chapter reinforces discipline. Each verse follows ordered sequence, suggesting that grief itself is contained within covenant awareness. This is not rage against heaven, it is mourning before heaven, or unto heaven. So further verses acknowledge this responsibility. Here it is in the Ethiopian witness. Jerusalem has sinned grievously, therefore she has become vile. Here it is in the King James. Jerusalem hath grievously sinned, therefore she is removed. That's different. Well, the Ethiopian phrasing has become vile reads as moral exposure. The King James is removed emphasizes consequence. Both actually preserve confession, and the Lament does not deny guilt. Tone determines whether readers perceive the city as victim alone or participant in covenant breach. They're not victims. And both witness maintain balance, as suffering is described, but sin is acknowledged. This opening chapter establishes the posture of the entire book. The city weeps, the people mourn, responsibility is confessed, abandonment is felt, yet the lament remains reverent. The Ethiopian rendering emphasizes immediacy of sorrow. The King James cadence lends liturgical gravity, and neither actually alters theology. But the difference lies in sound, modern clarity versus elevated solemnity. This section anchors the examination, as Lamentations begins with disciplined grief. The widow sits alone, yet she speaks with covenant frame. Judgment has come, the tears then begin. In the second chapter, the lament shifts from description of desolation to recognition of divine agency. The fall of Jerusalem is no longer narrated only as military defeat. It is actually confessed as judgment from the Lord. So tone here is crucial, because if translation intensifies divine action without preserving covenant justice, well, the text may sound accusatory. But if it softens agency, then the theological clarity of consequence fades. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox witness, and I quote, "How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger." Exclamation point, which is not in the King James. "He has cast down from heaven to the earth the beauty of Israel, and did not remember his footstool in the day of his anger." The Lord has swallowed up and not pitied all the dwelling places of Jacob. In his wrath, he has thrown down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. Now, here's that same verse in the King James. You're going to see some differences here. "How hath the Lord covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger, and cast down from heaven unto the earth the beauty of Israel, and remembered not his footstool in the day of his anger." The Lord hath swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. He hath thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. So the structure is identical. The Ethiopian rendering actually reads with direct modern cadence, while the King James retains solemn repetition of hath and archaic phrasing that deepens liturgical tone. Both attribute destruction explicitly to the Lord. And the repeated phrase, in his anger, does anchor theology of judgment. Yet this anger is not portrayed as uncontrolled rage. It is covenant response, as earlier warnings have now been fulfilled. Tone must preserve solemn inevitability rather than emotional volatility. So the phrase, did not remember his footstool, may sound stark. It does not imply forgetfulness and weakness, but suspension of protective favor. And the temple, once protected, is no longer shielded, as both witnesses preserve this imagery. Further verses intensify the sorrow. Here it is in the Ethiopian witness. The Lord hath done what he purposed. He hath fulfilled his word, which he commanded in days of old. Here's that same verse in the King James. The Lord hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. So this line clarifies tone. Destruction is not arbitrary. It is fulfillment of prior covenant warnings. Translation must preserve this continuity. If judgment appears sudden, divine character seems unstable. So both witnesses maintain that this was forewarned consequence. So theologically, this chapter affirms divine sovereignty without denying human responsibility. The people sinned. The Lord acted according to covenant terms. And the lament does not accuse God of injustice. It acknowledges his righteousness even while mourning his hand. So tone here shapes how this acknowledgement is actually heard. The Ethiopian phrasing's clarity emphasizes purpose fulfilled. The King James cadence adds solemn gravity, but neither distorts the theological frame. So this deepens the lament as the city is not only abandoned, it is disciplined. Yet even with an acknowledgement of divine anger, reverence does remain. The grief is honest but not rebellious. Judgment has come, and the covenant Lord is recognized as its source, and the lament continues within that awareness. So now we're going to shift perspectives here as the voice becomes singular. It says, I am the man who has seen affliction. Well, the sorrow intensifies inwardly, yet the structure remains disciplined. This is the longest chapter in the book, and it forms the theological center. Tone here is decisive. If hope is exaggerated, then the ruin surrounding it is diminished. If despair overwhelms the passage, the covenant anchor disappears. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, I am the man who has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He has led me and made me walk in darkness and not in light. He has hedged me in so that I cannot get out. He has made my chain heavy. Even when I cry and shout, he shuts out my prayer. Here's the same verse in the King James. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. He hath led me and brought me into darkness, but not into light. He hath hedged me about that I cannot get out. He hath made my chain heavy. Also, when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. So the tone in both witnesses is intense but measured. Divine agency is again acknowledged, and affliction is not random. Yet the lament remains reverent. The speaker does not renounce God, he speaks to him. And then in the center of this chapter, a turning occurs. Here it is in the Ethiopian. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. Though the Lord's mercies we are not consumed, because his compassions do not fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Here's that same verse in the King James. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. The alignment is close. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity. The phrase, through the Lord's mercies, we are not consumed. But the King James retains the archaic construction, it is of the Lord's mercies. Will both preserve the theological assertion that mercy has limited destruction. And the phrase, great is your faithfulness, stands as the pivot of this book. It does not deny suffering, it anchors hope within it. So tone must preserve restraint, as this is not triumphalism. It's quiet endurance. So theologically, this passage affirms covenant continuity. Though the city has fallen, annihilation has not occurred, and compassion persists daily. So hope is chosen as an act of mercy. Thus, this I recall to my mind. While the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes immediacy and renewal, the King James cadence lends liturgical gravity. But neither alters theology, but cadence does shape how the hope is heard, either as personal reassurance or formal confession. So this should reveal the heart of Lamentations as grief speaks honestly. Affliction is confessed, yet memory of mercy interrupts despair. Faithfulness is declared while circumstances remain unchanged. So the examination, again, must continue listening for whether translation preserves this delicate balance. As in Lamentations, hope does not erase ruin. It rises within it. So next we return to the communal description, not only, but the tone actually shifts from direct lament to reflective contrast, especially in chapter 4. The poet recalls what once was and sets it beside what now is. Gold has dimmed. Princes are unrecognizable. And the sacred has been reduced to ash. Translation here must preserve sobriety. If imagery is dramatized, it risks spectacle. But if it's softened, the severity of reversal then fades. Here it is in the Ethiopian. How the gold has become dim. How the fine gold has changed. The stones of the sanctuary are scattered at the head of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how they are regarded as earthen jars, the work of a potter's hands. Here's that same in the King James. How is the gold become dim? How is most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the works of the hands of the potter? Structural alignment's pretty strong here. The Ethiopian rendering reads with contemporary clarity, scattered at the head of every street, while the King James phrase, poured out in the top of every street, well, it carries archaic resonance. Both convey desecration and dispersion, however. And the image of gold becoming common clay echoes the earlier potter imagery in Jeremiah. What was consecrated has been reduced, as tone must preserve gravity rather than embellishment. So the lament remains dignified even in devastation. So we learn that this intensifies with stark descriptions of famine and suffering. Yet even here in the book, responsibility is not erased. Here it is in the Ethiopian. The punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom. Here's that same in King James. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom. The wording is nearly identical. The comparison to Sodom is severe, but it is framed as acknowledgement, of consequence, not accusation of injustice. The lament does not protest disproportion. It confesses depth of breach. Now, theologically, this chapter reinforces covenant reversal. Privilege magnifies responsibility, and the greater the calling, the greater the consequence when allegiance collapses. So translation must preserve this moral weight without sensational tone. And the Ethiopian phrasing, its clarity emphasizes visible decline. The King James cadence carries solemn rhythm that feels almost liturgical, but neither alters the doctrine. So the difference lies in emotional shading. If the reader is reading it as they read from the beginning, as we've learned from the beginning of these studies, that there has been some changes when it comes to the King James as far as wording and the Ethiopian in the beginning, but during the middle of the book, it seems to be almost exact, including the truth that the theology hasn't changed, but the cadence has when it comes to reading the King James in English, Old English understanding. So this should remind us that exile is not merely political displacement. It is loss of consecrated identity, which is important. The children of Israel were the children of God, and they lost their identity. And here, gold has dimmed. Sanctuary stones are scattered, and the sons are just regarded as clay. It's kind of a big deal. Yet even in this reflection, the lament does not sever covenant memory. It acknowledges severity, but within awareness of divine justice. The sorrow remains reverent, the ruin remains real, and the hope declared earlier still stands, though not repeated loudly. So we need to still examine and continue listening for whether translation preserves the disciplined weight of this reversal without amplifying despair or diminishing the consequence. In Lamentations, memory sharpens grief, but it does not erase covenant frame. And the final chapter shifts from structured acrostic form into communal prayer. The ordered alphabet gives way to direct appeal. The tone becomes corporate and petitionary. This is not the collapse of discipline, but its culmination. And the lament turns fully toward God, as translation must preserve both humility and urgency without exaggerating either. Here it is in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox. Remember, O Lord, what has come upon us. Look and behold our reproach. Our inheritance has been turned over to strangers, our houses to aliens. No, not the extraterrestrial kind. We have become orphans and waifs. Our mothers are like widows. Woe to us, for we have sinned. Because of this, our heart is faint. Because of these things, our eyes grow dim. Here's the same in the King James. Remember, O Lord, what is come upon us. Consider and behold our reproach. Our inheritance is turned to strangers, our houses to aliens. We are orphans and fatherless. Our mothers are as widows. Woe unto us that we have sinned. For this, our heart is faint. For these things, our eyes are dim. So the structural alignment here is clear. The Ethiopian rendering reads with direct clarity, look and behold our reproach. And the King James retains formal solemnity, consider and behold our reproach, but neither diminishes the urgency here. And the confession remains central, woe to us, for we have sinned. Well, the lament does not deflect blame. Even in pleading for mercy, accountability is acknowledged. So tone must preserve this humility. And the closing verses intensify the appeal. Here it is in the Ethiopian. You, O Lord, remain forever, your throne from generation to generation. Why do you forget us forever and forsake us for so long a time? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, and we shall be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are very angry with us. Here's the same verse in the King James. Thou, O Lord, remainest forever, thy throne from generation to generation. Wherefore dost thou forget us forever and forsake us so long time? Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old. But thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wrath against us. So the tone is delicate. The Ethiopian phrasing, restore us to yourself, emphasizes relational return. And the King James, turn thou us unto thee, carries a similar meaning, although archaic cadence shapes its sound. So the final line differs subtly in tone. The Ethiopian rendering presents that as a conditional tension, unless you have utterly rejected us. Well, the King James reads more declarative, but thou hast utterly rejected us. Unless you have, but you have. Unless you have, but you have. Let me say it again. Unless you have, but you have. So, tone here. It's either you did or you didn't. Tone profoundly affects how this book ends. It ends with unresolved questions or even solemn declaration. But scholars do note that the Hebrew can read either as plea or fearful statement. That's what scholars say about this. But it's either he does or he doesn't. Just so you know. Theologically, the closing appeal does not accuse God of injustice. Especially with the Ethiopian, it does not. The King James, if you read it incorrectly, yeah, it will appear as though it's accusing God of injustice. There you have it. It recognizes his enduring throne. Covenant sovereignty remains intact, and the plea arises from faith and not rebellion. So Lamentations ends without visible restoration. The temple is not rebuilt within its pages, and the city is not restored. The prayer remains open, as this unresolved ending preserves the realism of exile while anchoring hope in divine permanence. So the Ethiopian phrasing's relational clarity, it emphasizes restoration as return to God himself, while the King James cadence heightens solemn gravity. So neither alters the theology, but the cadence really does shape the emotional resonance of the final appeal. It can shape your vision of God as wrathful. So the book closes in tension. Sorrow is confessed, sin is acknowledged, sovereignty is affirmed, restoration is requested. And the final word is not triumph nor despair, but a simple plea. The covenant remains the ground of hope, even when fulfillment is not yet seen. So Lamentations is not only defined by what it says, but how it is formed. 4 of its 5 chapters follow an acrostic pattern, moving letter by letter through the Hebrew alphabet. And this structure must be considered theologically. Grief is given order. Suffering is spoken without boundaries. So again, tone here is restrained rather than explosive. And translation cannot reproduce the acrostic fully in English, but it must preserve the discipline of expression. Here it is an example in the Ethiopian Tewahedo, and I quote, "The Lord is righteous. The Lord is righteous, for I rebelled against his command. Hear now, all peoples, and behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men have gone into captivity." King James, it reads as though, and I quote, "The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. My virgins and my young men are gone into captivity." The confession of righteousness stands at the heart of the lament. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity, "I rebelled." The King James reads similarly, though its archaic cadence carries solemn gravity. Both still preserve theological accountability, but unless you are a theologian and understand the Old English, you're not going to get the King James Bible. You're going to see an angry God. who scatters virgins. Now, the structure of Lamentations ensures that grief never abandons reverence. Even when describing devastation, the speaker affirms divine righteousness. The disciple of alphabetical order mirrors moral order. Sorry, the discipline, not disciple. The discipline of alphabetical order mirrors moral order. So, judgment is not chaos, but it is covenant consequence. And here's another example of that. Here it is in the Ethiopian witness, and I quote, "The Lord has accomplished his fury. He has poured out his fierce anger. He kindled a fire in Zion, and it has devoured its foundations." Here's the same verse in King James. "The Lord hath accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger. He hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof." Well, the language is strong, yet it remains controlled. Fury is accomplished. Anger is poured out. Well, the verbs imply completion, not perpetual rage. Translation must preserve this sense of measured discipline rather than ongoing volatility. So theologically, Lamentations does not frame suffering as random cruelty. But if you read the King James, it'll sure look like it. And it presents it as a fulfillment of warnings long spoken. And the structured poetry reinforces that even devastation remains under sovereign order. And tone again shapes perception here. If anger language is intensified beyond context, which the Catholic Church used that to their advantage, we have proof of it, then divine character appears unstable. But if it's softened, like the Ethiopian, covenant seriousness then fades. But both witnesses maintain proportion. It's fierce, yet finite, severe, yet purposeful, which is why both complement each other. The Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and completion, while the King James cadence deepens solemn resonance. But neither alters the theology. The differences lie in sound and emotional shading. So again, this should reinforce that Lamentations is disciplined grief. It is not uncontrolled despair. It is structured acknowledgement of covenant consequence under a righteous throne. The lament moves alphabetically, but it moves within faith. Judgment has come. Order remains. Mercy is still remembered. But will the children of Israel remember? They seem to forget really quick. Throughout Lamentations, one refrain echoes with painful consistency. There is none to comfort her. Well, the absence of comfort becomes both emotional and theological tension. Tone here must be heard carefully. The text does not deny God's existence. It expresses the felt distance between suffering and relief. Translation must preserve both the ache and the reverence. Here it is again in the Ethiopian. She weeps bitterly in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. And Zion spreads out her hands, but there is none to comfort her. Here's the same in the King James. She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. Zion spreadeth forth her hands, and there is none to comfort her. So the repetition remains intact in both witnesses, but the Ethiopian phrasing reads with contemporary clarity. The King James cadence, however, though archaic verbs such as weepeth, spreadeth, still carries liturgical solemnity. The theology does not change, and the emotional shading subtly shifts. But the absence of comfort does not imply divine non-existence. It reflects the felt experience of discipline. Earlier in Jeremiah, we learned that comfort was promised after 70 years. Well, here, in the immediate aftermath, it is not yet visible. So the lament holds that tension. Now, theologically, this refrain underscores covenant seriousness. Comfort is withheld not because mercy is erased, but because consequence is unfolding. And the people sought other lovers, foreign alliances and false securities. Now those lovers provide no relief. Sounds like how America is. The absence of comfort exposes misplaced trust. So tone here must preserve, again, both sorrow and moral clarity. If translation intensifies abandonment into accusation against God, then the text is distorted. If it softens the absence into mild inconvenience, then the devastation of exile then fades. So both witnesses actually maintain dignified grief. But if you weren't trained as a theologian, you wouldn't understand it. That's why reading the King James Version gives you an angry God. The Ethiopian renderings, directness emphasizes immediacy of loss. The King James cadence heightens solemnity. Neither changes doctrine, but the difference lies in rhythm and sound and tone. Yet even in the absence of comfort, the lament is spoken to God. The hands are spread outward, the plea is not abandoned, the search for consolation remains oriented toward the covenant Lord. And we've learned that God will use even just one or two people to restore Israel if they just repent. So this should reinforce that Lamentations is not faithlessness. It is faith under strain. They knew it was coming. It was foretold. And comfort is absent in experience, yet sought in prayer. So the lament names the emptiness honestly while remaining within covenant frame. And the examination continues listening for how translation preserves this balance of sorrow and reverent appeal. So Lamentations does not resolve grief quickly. After confession and declaration of mercy in chapter 3, the poet introduces another dimension, waiting. That's the dimension, waiting. Hope is not loud, it is quiet endurance. Tone here must be handled carefully. If translation intensifies suffering language alone, then waiting may sound like resignation. If it exaggerates hope, then realism of exile fades. Here's an example in the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox canon verse, I quote, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should hope and wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man to bear the yoke in his youth. Let him sit alone and keep silent, because God has laid it on him." Here's the same verse in the King James. "The Lord is good unto them that wait for him, to the soul that seeketh him. It is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for a man that he bear the yoke in his youth. He sitteth alone and keepeth silence, because he hath borne it upon him." Again, the structure is closely aligned. The Ethiopian phrasing reads with direct clarity, "Wait quietly," while the King James reverses the phrase, "Hope and quietly wait," retaining solemn cadence. Both preserve the theological principle. Waiting is not passive despair, but disciplined trust. And the phrase, "bear the yoke," recalls covenant imagery of discipline. The yoke is not celebrated, but it is accepted. Tone must preserve sobriety rather than stoicism. So the waiting is reverent submission and not emotional numbness. And the call to sit alone and keep silent could be misunderstood if it's stripped from context. It does not endorse isolation from God. It reflects posture of humility under correction. Now, here, translation must maintain this nuance. Theologically, the passage affirms that hope in Lamentations is not denial of pain. It is patient expectation grounded in divine character. As the Lord is good to those who wait, mercy remains, though restoration is not immediate. So again, tone determines whether this section feels gentle or stern. It feels gentle in the Ethiopian. It feels stern in King James. Well, the Ethiopian clarity emphasizes goodness and quiet trust. In the King James, its cadence lends formal gravity. but neither alters the doctrine. The difference lies in emotional shading. And I believe the Catholic Church knew this and used it against the people. So again, this should reinforce the discipline of lament. Grief is structured. Confession is honest. Hope is remembered. Now waiting becomes the posture between ruin and renewal. So Lamentations does not rush toward visible restoration. It teaches endurance and silence, seeking, bearing, waiting. Judgment is fallen, but faithfulness is not forgotten. The examination continues, listening for whether translation preserves this restrained hope without softening suffering or dramatizing despair. So as Lamentations progresses, sorrow deepens into explicit confession. The destruction of Jerusalem is no longer described only as tragedy. It is acknowledged as consequence. Tone here is critical. If translation intensifies self-condemnation excessively, well, then despair dominates. If it softens confession, covenant accountability then weakens. Here it is in the Ethiopian, I quote, "The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his command. Hear now, all peoples, and behold my sorrow. We have transgressed and rebelled. You have not pardoned. You have covered yourself with anger and pursued us. You have slain and not pitied." Here's the same verse in the King James. "The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. We have transgressed and have rebelled. Thou hast not pardoned. Thou hast covered with anger and persecuted us. Thou hast slain. Thou hast not pitied." Well, the alignment remains strong. Both witnesses preserve the central confession, the Lord is righteous. And this declaration anchors the theology of the book. The lament does not accuse God of injustice. It acknowledges rebellion. They're basically saying, we know what we did, and we know these are the consequences. The lament does not accuse God of injustice. It acknowledges the rebellion. So the Ethiopian rendering reads with modern clarity, "You have pursued us." Well, the King James phrase, "persecuted us." There's a big difference here. The persecuted us may sound harder to contemporary ears. Think about that. You have pursued us. King James, you persecuted us. Come on. Those two, pursued, you went after us. Persecuted is like really harsh. But historically, it conveyed active pursuit. Tone shifts subtly depending on the lexical resonance and your understanding of Old English. The repetition of "not pitied" reinforces severity, yet it does so within covenant frame. The destruction is not described as chaotic cruelty, as it is fulfillment of warnings previously given by God himself. So translation must preserve this measured gravity. And theologically, confession in Lamentations does not collapse into hopelessness. It becomes the ground for appeal. By affirming divine righteousness, the people position themselves for mercy. And accountability is not self-annihilation. It is acknowledgement before a just throne. Remember, God warned them. They could have left, but they stayed, and they paid the price. And they knew that if they stayed, they paid the price, but they stayed anyway. They could have left, picked up their shawls, jumped on a donkey, and just get the hell away from everyone. Just saying. Tone must preserve this reverent posture here, folks. If the language of divine anger is amplified beyond proportion, then God appears volatile. If confession is minimized, the seriousness of covenant breach disappears. So both witnesses maintain a balance here. Sin is named, righteousness affirmed, and sorrow expressed. Yes, he pursued them. Yes, he persecuted them. It wasn't without warning. They knew it was coming in 70 years, and they still went, let's stick around and just wait. Sorry, that's what it says. That's what they did. So the Ethiopian phrasing emphasizes clarity and relational address. The King James cadence adds solemn gravity here, but neither alters doctrine. The difference lies in emotional shading and rhythm. So this again reinforces that Lamentations is not protest against divine character, against God. It is submission under it. The people confess rebellion openly. They recognize justice. Yet the lament continues because acknowledgement of righteousness does not erase longing for restoration. And I know, guys, this stuff is so dry. Even I am falling asleep from it. And we've got like literally 30 more shows to do on this. I'm sorry. But we have to do it. We have to. Because this gives us the truth of what's really going on. Wouldn't you rather know God correctly than not? And what we've been learning throughout our examination of the Ethiopian and King James is that side by side, you see the reasoning behind everything and it makes sense. I know this stuff is just dry. I want to get through it fast. Believe me, when I started this show, all I wanted to talk about was conspiracy theories, and here we are. I can't help it. But I do know that this information, these shows, all about the examination of Ethiopian and the King James, it's going to be wonderful for others who didn't know anything about this. So the examination must continue listening for whether translation preserves this integration of confession and reverence without intensifying despair or diminishing accountability. In Lamentations, sorrow bows before righteousness and still dares to hope in God. So Lamentations does not conclude with resolution. It ends in appeal. The temple is not rebuilt within its pages. The city is not restored before the final line. The book actually closes in tension. In tension. Tone here is decisive. If translation renders the ending as despair, then hope seems extinguished. But if it renders it as quiet trust, well, the unresolved ache must still be preserved, which is the latter. Here it is in the Ethiopian, and I quote, "You, O Lord, remain forever. Your throne from generation to generation. Why do you forget us forever and forsake us for so long a time? Restore us to yourself, O Lord, and we shall be restored. Renew our days as of old, unless you have utterly rejected us and are exceedingly angry with us." Here it is in the King James. Remember, if you read it as an angry God, "Thou, O Lord, remainest forever, thy throne from generation to generation. Wherefore dost thou forget us forever and forsake us so long time? Turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old, but thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wrath against us." Thank you, Boots. He says, yeah, it's much more enjoyable with the loving God. I would agree. Well, the opening declaration anchors the theology of the ending. The Lord remains, his throne endures. Sovereignty has not been shaken by Jerusalem's fall. Both witnesses preserve this affirmation clearly. The plea that follows reveals tension. Restore us to yourself, emphasizes relational return. The King James, "Turn thou us unto thee," well, it conveys the same movement, though in archaic cadence. Restoration is framed not merely as rebuilding structures, but as returning to God. So the final line introduces interpretive nuance, and the Ethiopian rendering reads as conditional fear. Unless you have utterly rejected us. Well, the King James reads more declaratively here, but thou hast utterly rejected us. Well, the King James Hebrew allows both shades of tone, anxious questions or somber acknowledgement. And this subtle difference shapes how the book feels as it closes. So theologically, Lamentations ends beneath an enduring throne, and the lament does not deny sovereignty. It appeals to it. And the people confess sin, affirm righteousness, and request renewal. But the tension remains unresolved within the text itself. So tone, again, determines whether readers experience the ending as suspended hope or lingering despair. The Ethiopian phrasing leans towards conditional plea. The King James cadence carries solemn finality, but neither alters covenant theology. Again, both leave restoration beyond the final verse, not yet visible, but still sought. And Lamentations closes without triumph, yet not without faith. So the throne remains, the plea rises, the sorrow has been spoken fully, and the mercy declared earlier still stands. So the book ends where covenant faith often stands, in space between ruin and renewal, beneath a throne that remains forever. So to conclude, and yes, we're getting off a little early tonight because I'm freaking exhausted. Lamentation stands as Scripture's most disciplined expression of grief. It does not deny devastation. It does not rush toward comfort. It gives sorrow its full voice, yet within ordered structure and covenant awareness. Jerusalem has fallen. The temple has burned. The people have been scattered. Yet even in ruin, the throne of the Lord remains acknowledged as eternal. And throughout this examination, the Ethiopian and the King James have preserved the theological integrity of the book. The widow city, the acknowledgement of sin, the affirmation of divine righteousness, the declaration that mercies are new every morning, and the final plea for restoration all stand intact in both traditions. The covenant frame never collapses. But the differences that emerge are tonal rather than doctrinal. The Ethiopian phrasing often reads with immediate clarity and relational emphasis, while the King James carries solemn liturgical gravity that deepens the weight of lament. Subtle nuances, such as whether the final line reads as conditional plea or somber declaration, shape emotional resonance, but not covenant theology. So Lamentations presents anger as accomplished, not perpetual. Discipline as severe, yet it's measured, and sorrow as real, yet reverent. And the confession, the Lord is righteous, it anchors the entire book. They're saying, hey, you're still righteous. We deserve this. We know why it's happening. Hope is not triumphal. It is quiet endurance. And faithfulness is declared while ruins still stand. So the book does not resolve its tension. It ends in appeal. Restoration is requested, not yet realized. And this unresolved ending preserves the realism of exile and patience of faith. So the throne endures even when the city falls. I'm serious. The guiding question of the series remains consistent. Does translation alter theology or does it shape cadence? Well, we've learned in Lamentations, theology remains stable across both witnesses. Judgment is acknowledged, mercy is remembered, hope is disciplined. And Lamentations teaches that grief spoken before God is not faithfulness. It is covenant fidelity under strain. And the tears of exile do not erase divine faithfulness. They cry beneath it. They cry beneath it. And the final word is not despair, it is plea beneath the throne that remains forever. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Garner. Tune in tomorrow night when I have another edition of the next book after Lamentations. I forgot what it is. I'm exhausted. God bless you guys. God keep you. And God thank you for supporting my show. Thank you for being here, the 12 of you who are with me at the close. Guys, I love you all. And when I say love, it's an action. I'd do anything for you. We will see you guys tomorrow. God bless.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.